Okay.
All right, so this is the Falls Road Improvements Committee meeting for December 9th at 7 o'clock. Call to order. First order of business is to approve the minutes. Anybody have any changes or additions to that?
I'll make a motion.
Howard
Second.
and Dave? Second. Okay, so the first piece here is the zoning report, which
But we have to vote on it. It's okay.
all in favor
Aye.
of approving the minutes. The first piece is the report from the zoning committee, and Ray and Howard and I have been working on things, but I thought first we would let Kurt, you were gonna introduce something. Now I'm getting lost here today.
Just a refresher on the master plan.
Yeah, just a refresher on the master plan and how it affects the zoning and.
Sure, absolutely, and Jeff, please jump in. So very simple, the master plan really in global terms, two main components. We've got the public component, which essentially is Halls Road, Route 1, controlled by the DOT, and then we have the private property, which I guess we could call the other. So those two major components. Both components are included in the master plan, which is again just a vision and an amalgamation of ideas and things. In the public realm, and this is where I've been working with Edie and the committee, we can make improvements within the public realm that support the ultimate vision of the master plan. Those tend to be streetscape improvements, sidewalks, other roadway improvements that complement and support all the other work that is envisioned. Clearly, the road is controlled by Connecticut DOT, so everything we do on that road has to meet, with their scrutiny. And then, of course, money is a big barrier to that. So to that end, we've been researching what grants are out there, and there are several available grants, some of which actually the town of Old has had the benefit of receiving. So really getting those grants will allow you to begin some of the work in the public part of the project. In the public realm, you can control what happens there by virtue of your design. So you can do a design, define the various elements of that design, what that design does. On the private side of things, and I'll defer to Jeff on that, but what we hope to do is encourage private development by others. The one mechanism that you have to help affect those changes, but also manage those changes, is the zoning piece. And that's where Jeff's expertise comes in. So that's why we kind of say it's the two big pieces, public and private.
So Deb, I know you had some questions. Do you want to ask Kurt directly or?
I have a question. So one of the things that we've talked about is, and I don't think that you guys have been part of the conversation, is the sequencing. So what you just described are two items, which is logical. Is there a need, because the zoning changes are very significant? They don't necessarily affect the public part of the project as you described it, right? So is there a parallel path where we could be pursuing something for the streetscapes currently at the same time that we try to gain as much agreement on what could or couldn't happen on the zoning side?
Yes, absolutely. And the good news is we're actually on those two parallel paths right now. With some of the zoning things happening, even the discussions here tonight. In the meantime, we've actually already met Riverfrog to talk about lot zip funding, which we think is probably
Not the funding side. I'm just talking about the streetscape itself, because I'm thinking sequencing wise, right? So
yeah,
we've arrive, and let's, again, put the private side out, because that was a bunch of pictures. The actual streetscape stuff, that's a more firm plan, if you will, right? That we would
That's correct.
like to present to DOT, hey, we'd like some on-street parking, and we'd like to do, some bus enclosures and those sorts of things. What is the sequence for the streets, just the streets? And can that be done independent of the other parts that we're discussing
Yes, it can.
independently?
Yep. And the limitation to those typically, I'll just say in typical terms, the limitation to that is always the funding.
Yep.
For the most part, the way these programs work is the municipality funds all of the design. And then the DOT, through its various funding sources, funds the actual construction. Most municipalities are reluctant to complete a full design until they have a funding commitment, because they're concerned if they spend the money on the design, they'll have a set of construction drawings, and then all of a sudden, if they don't get funded, they'll have spent money that they're concerned may not have a long shelf life or something. So what we've done for this project, those wheels are kind of already turning. We've given the committee a proposal to do what we call an initial design, which is enough to include in your funding application, so DOT can see that, okay, you do have a project here. There's engineered prints, there's drawings. We feel that that will boost your chances of getting the funding commitment. Some of the COGs, and the way these fundings work, they go through the COG, in this case, the river COG here, but some of them actually are wanting, and we've seen this trend happen, some of them want a lot more design than they used to. And I think what has happened is some of the projects have gone in with very little design backup. They get funded. And again, that's for the construction side. And then they embark on their design process and they run into various issues that hold the project up. Well, because the funding is limited, these COGs only get a certain allocation every funding cycle. They have found that funding ends up getting tied up for projects that suddenly are not as viable as they seemed. So that's why we've scoped out this initial design phase, which will be used to sort of vet out some of the things, engage DOT at a much higher level than we did during the master planning process, and actually end up with a set of drawings that will be part of the LOTSIP application process. So in a way, we have sort of decoupled that from the zoning, and we're sort of forging ahead with that. So they can follow parallel paths for sure.
So we spent a bunch of time and money already to get to a point where we have a plan where we've got, hey, we'd like to do a bike path, we'd like to do parking, and it's located here. And we want to, have some pull-ups for buses. We've done the wish list already. Is that your understanding, or? I think that's the committee's understanding.
Yep, the master plan is the vision, if you will.
But I'm talking about just the streetscapes.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
And have you guys talked to DOT to say, can we even do on street parking? Have you had the conversations
Yep.
where elements of it can easily be, X? Hey, there's no islands no matter what. Fine, that's great. Okay, X that out so that it can be significantly pared down if required before advancing more funds for a more discrete set of plans, which requires, I would imagine, surveys and those sorts of things, right?
Not necessarily.
So if it's not necessarily, then how do you know where the DOT, where the properties, and because there's a ton of easements. I mean, it's a fairly unique road. So there are a lot of weird easements. So I know from owning property. So if you don't need a survey, what you're saying is you don't need a survey to get to funding necessarily.
Correct.
Is that right?
Right.
Because the DOT will say, hey, that looks like a good project, but then you need a survey in order to
Oh, absolutely.
do the actual project.
That's right. Once you get into
So
the more detailed design, you absolutely will need a DOT level survey that defines all the elements to a very high degree of certainty, everything from topographic information, the location of all the drainage, the right of way, curb line, sign, an incredibly detailed survey.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, because we don't have that on our pathway, right? We just got kind of
This is
zoning.
really just about.
Zoning.
Having the zoning.
Right. So have you guys talked to DOT at all about the master plan? Kind of.
Oh,
since
yeah,
it's-
we've had numerous conversations with them.
And will they allow on-site parking?
It's,
Or on-street parking?
yep, it's indecisive. What really DOT want, if you want them to give you firm answers, definitive answers to things, you need a set of plans. But right now, we have a master plan, which is a graphical in nature.
So-
They're gonna wanna see something that looks more like an engineered.
Even for them to say it's US 1, it's a permanent detour. We're not gonna allow it just out of the box. You're saying that we need to spend a whole bunch of money for them to tell us whether we want to park or not,
Yes,
okay?
I thought my understanding was that when you go to the DOT, the more complete picture of the overall plan and vision, it's more likely to them approve it, that they'd prefer not to do things piecemeal
correct.
and without understanding what the ultimate plan is.
Yep, that's correct. And again, that's right along the lines of this next step in the process, whereas the master plan isn't really design, if you will. We want to take it one notch further, so then we can truly have that set of plans. That includes, by the way, various details of construction that frankly aren't appropriate as part of a master plan.
Curb heights.
Yes, exactly. This set of plans that we produce would have all of that.
So you have to produce, what you're saying is, in your experience, the DOT has never said, you just can't do that on this road.
Never is a pretty strong word. I wouldn't say never. I'm sure there's situations where there's things that people have proposed where they've said, but
Yeah.
it is a much better process, and you'll get a much more definitive answer from them with a clear set of what I keep calling engineered plans.
But when there are a few very big things that we've got here, on-street parking is one of the largest.
Yep. And the answer we've gotten is it's possible.
And, okay, and have you talked to any of our reps or anything to see if we can get a more different, before us paying for plans?
You mean
for them to
DOT
come back?
people?
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
No,
Oh.
I'm talking about elected officials or anybody like that.
No, I'll defer to the committee for that kind of
Okay.
stuff. I'm just the engineer.
Yeah. But no, I'm just trying to truncate the process and save 25 grand for designing stuff that these guys, if they can get pushed a tiny bit, can say that we'd never allow that on that
Yeah.
particular road. That's.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
And again, really the major reason for the next iteration of the design is to try to get you the funding.
Right.
It's, I think, Edie, we talked about 2 million, we're trying to go for 2 million. That's really what this plan said is to give you a better representation when that application package goes in, that you've got a set of plans. Because you're competing with other towns that already have done design.
Yeah.
And if you haven't, they kind of weigh them against each other. They can say, well, these guys have a real project. These guys don't. You want to be able to go in there and say, this is real. We've really looked at this.
Yeah.
We've gotten some detail.
And also the LOXIP is a DOT grant anyway. So that when you provide this LOXIP grant and you send it in, it's going to the DOT. It's not going to some other group. It's going to the DOT that's going to look at it and say,
Yeah, we've dealt with them
Oh,
in
we can't do
we've
that.
dealt with them in the town in the past, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess,
so that's that LOXIP grant the town has never applied for before, which is to our favor.
It is.
But that's the thing that these engineered drawings are helping them see. Not only do we have a vision of what we want to see strategically in the future, we also have a picture of the details of curb cuts and all the engineered details. You don't need to get down to the nitty gritty of the survey until they say, we can give you these or not that.
Yeah.
If you're asking.
I guess the other reason to have a certain, because commercial real estate is what I do, so I deal with surveys all the time, roads, et cetera. The first thing that you do is a survey. Now I'm like halfway through the project. So especially because here the setbacks are a little bit weird too. And so you want to figure out, do you need a private easement? You know, if you've got a sidewalk and the DOT right away, you know, has been used up, you're going to button into this private, that sort of thing.
Yes,
So-
we would get all of the DOT right-of-way mapping, so we have access, so we'll know where that is, and we would superimpose that onto the base plan. We would also use state of Connecticut orthophotography that actually has 2-foot contours
Yeah,
on
I'm
it.
sure, but my question is just the sequence. I
Yep,
have
yep.
not understood from the beginning of this.
Okay, sure.
Why you wouldn't have the easy, even if it's not a survey, if you've got the DOT plans to overlay what we've been talking about
And we will,
for like
yeah.
a year, it would be nice to see whether it comports or doesn't.
Yeah, and the only reason that we did recommend this survey is just to try to save some money. You know, theoretically,
But now we're gonna spend money for them to tell us that they can't have potential.
Also, the drawings they do.
Yeah, but it's peanuts compared to a real survey. It's peanuts. So let's get real. 25,000 is nothing. That's the cost of doing one lot.
And actually,
That's
So-
no, it's not.
Well, I don't mean that, but I mean, we've got a number of lots. We got 7/10 of a mile, so 25 grand is not very much in my estimation. The other point I'd like to make also,
5,000 is 13.5, that the
I
proposal
think it
is.
was, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and also, any of the drawings that get created for this
Yeah,
grant proposal will be available to be used in final use.
yeah.
So
Good
it's
point,
not
Edie,
like
yeah.
just wasted-
We're not just doing it and throw away. This is actually your first step in design. So think of it as a layer, once this layer is completed, once the survey gets done, the survey just gets inserted. All the things we do are still, fully usable.
It is the reverse of what.
Well, you're using it as a private novel, right?
Right, but my point is, anything you can do up front to figure out what we can't do instead of paying for that design would be very helpful to the town. That's my point.
yeah. And we could do the survey. We were just looking at trying to save.
No, I'm not talking about,
um,
right.
Oh, the other stuff, and we will, yeah, we'll get all the right-of-way mapping. During this conceptual design process, we will actually
Can't we
talk
do
to
on-street
DOT.
parking? Because that is like the
Oh,
basis
yeah,
of
yeah,
what we're doing. So anybody that you can get that.
and we absolutely will,
Before us paying for a big
Yep.
design would be great.
absolutely.
I'd like to make one other point. I think, Kurt, that we have heard, or I have heard previously in earlier iterations of this process, that DOT, and we'll talk about, since DOT is interlocked in this case with LOCSIP, they like to see a plan that is I forget exactly what the term is, but it's like whole street or something to say that, pedestrians, bikes, everybody's involved. And that kind of requires to me that you have the overview also as a part of the package. What is this going to look like in 20 years? What's it going to look like? So it's not that we've wasted, all this effort to get, the master plan in place. You have to have a decent looking proposal. Otherwise, they'll just throw you in the wastebasket and wait till next year.
Could you just elaborate a little bit, kind of with the question that Dave raised about having elected representatives involved? I mean, where does the municipality, who do they usually go to? And who's the most effective doing that? Is it by position or is that just a?
Do you mean the grants, how the grants are
I'm
awarded?
talking about, I think you were.
Yeah, I mean, Devin Carney is our
Correct.
state rep and he's on transportation. Heather Summers is not our senator, but she's on transportation. Paul Formica is our senator. He's on appropriations and a whole bunch of other things. So, is there any way to, instead of just having this bureaucratic kind of thing that has taken a long time in other projects here in town, is there not another group of folks that could be helpful for getting easy, big answers to really refine our final project?
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that, because normally we just follow the standard process, and I guess it's possible.
But I think also Rivercog, when we talked with them, they said, when you apply for these grants, and if you get your state reps and senators backing this.
Yeah, letters of
that
support and
will-
those kinds
that
of
will
things.
have the grant go through, which also will put the pressure on DOT to recognize that this is, again, a real project that wants to go through. So that's where those guys come in. I actually had contacted them last summer and realized that because we didn't have the grant really close enough to be submitted, it didn't make sense to go to them quite yet, but I had talked with Devin Carney and Micah's office.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Another suggestion might be to speak to the COG to see what the pipeline is, because we get these monthly reports, and there are
Yeah.
projects that are inching up.
Yeah.
So you can look for your
Mhm.
slot to see if you're gonna look for a good sized grant. You know, you don't wanna try to barge in when there's a.
And we did meet with them, was it over the summer? Was
Yeah.
that the summer? So we got a feel for
the pipeline.
what the pipeline was, and they said they were a little bit backed up, but they had a fair amount of projects in the queue. So they told us that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means you have time to kind of work things out, you know, and get an application in. I think they had talked 2023.
well, I think the idea was we wanted to apply in 22
22.
to try and get it for
Yeah.
23, which
Yeah.
means you might end up in 24.
Yes.
And a COG can kind of hold people back so that if we haven't been there at the trough.
That's right. We want to get in
We
line.
lined up.
Yeah.
Yep.
We can work on that.
And actually, as first selectman, it's really helpful to have you talking with the state reps and
For
elected
sure.
officials as well,
Yeah.
because you're the guy.
Well,
So,
the time is right, sure.
Mhm.
Is there,
The other thing is, since that conversation this summer, the federal infrastructure bill has passed. So there'll be more funding coming to the state for projects like this. How the state decides to spend them, we're not sure yet.
Promise.
but there will be more
They can
money
only
coming.
help. They'll-
is there anything else that you would recommend? I mean, we talked about having a complete master plan that helps, going to potentially the reps who represent the town at the state level. Is there anything else we should be aware of, or we should do as a committee to try to influence DOT?
No, it's really the three things. It's the master plan to show that you've got the vision. So it shows where your project, and again, we're talking about the roadway itself. It shows where your project fits into that overall vision. That's key.
Right.
The second thing is this set of plans to show that it's a real project. You've got an engineered set of plans. As I mentioned, a lot of towns will submit even like a 50% design. We're not going that far. And then number three, the support of folks like Tim and the reps and those kinds of things. And I envision that those things could be part of your application package, right? Letters of support, and it all helps. And then really the COG is the one that has most of the decision-making on these things. Really, the COG indicated they've never really had a situation where a project passed muster with the COG and then went to DOT for final approval and was denied. So that's a very good thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
so my
And the
question,
COG has seen our drawings, they've seen our plans.
That's right. And they thought it was a great project. They supported it in concept, and they're actually the ones that kind of recommended the engineered set of drawings to take it to that next step.
so, and you're comfortable that what we've done with the COG is enough at this point? I mean, Edie sounded like you did it. And you guys did it.
Yes,
So
and
we're got that
Yep.
pipeline.
Yep, and what I think would be beneficial is if we move forward with this conceptual or preliminary design piece, concurrent with speaking with DOT, we would also engage college during that process, let them know that we're starting on this, and maybe at some point during that process, maybe have a quick meeting with them and show them what we're doing, make them part of the process. Get their buy-in.
Good, good advice.
And also, Tim and I had a Zoom meeting with them.
No,
That's great.
With them next month.
Yeah, Sam Roll.
So we've.
Okay, yeah, that's excellent.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think maybe the next part here is if we could move it on to Jeff describing what's going on with the zoning, because we have come up with some much better solutions.
Sure. So I think as everybody was aware, as part of the master planning process, we identified this vision for private property. And one of the tools the town has is to look at changing zoning that would support development in a way characterized by the master.
Ed, where was she?
So Deb, you gotta put it on mute.
So we did that, we created zoning for a new zoning district, as we were all aware that got submitted, and then we said, well, let's rethink this, because we were hearing some different comments and concerns. So what we've done is, there's been a suggestion that instead of replacing the current zoning that's along Cove Road, which is called the C30S zone, that we propose an overlay zone. So what an overlay zone does is it keeps that current C30 zone in place. And as it suggests, it's an overlay that says, if you choose to apply under the regulations of this overlay zone, you can do additional things within that zone. So what's there now and has been allowed can stay there and be permitted and not become what they call a grandfathered use, because it's not being, no rights are being taken away from what's there now.
Yeah, just to get rid of that issue about non-conforming.
Right.
So the overlay basically says, no, you have your existing zone, everything's fine with that.
Yep.
With the overlay zone, it now introduces the option of putting in residential. Some of the things that were in the village district will still be part of that overlay zone, but not to a point where, I mean, we'll still want to see commercial properties up along the road. But the residential piece will become a part of what you can do there now.
So it will increase the
It will
options.
increase.
That's correct.
That's the option.
So we definitely got the feeling with the village district, we kind of built that, trying to answer the need of the master plan, recognized, what about the property owners? So clearly, the overlay zone is a much better route to take. I think, as you had mentioned, Dave, there's some good things in that village district, but the idea of using an overlay is a much better way to get where we're trying to
Take it and stuff.
Right. And we're giving more as opposed to taking things away.
Right.
There's still some things that seem through that's that we should get rid of.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, and we've actually made,
So Kurt, if you could put that chart back up
can you put the first one, the big
on
long
the
one?
uses.
So we put together a little comparison chart, so
That one?
Fantastic.
showing the C30 chart, I mean, regulations, and what can or can't happen once you add in
Right, so we have 3 columns. This is for land uses. Describing land use, what is allowed or not allowed now under the C30S. and what is allowed or not allowed under the new Paul Road overlay zone. And we're still tweaking this. We were meeting with property owners and getting comments from people. And so we're not proposing this as the final version of this.
This is a-
We're open for additional comments.
So Jeff, the biggest question is gonna be those in pink in the right-hand column, is that right? So,
Over here.
right, those would be more restricted for folks who would fall in this stuff.
Yeah, like adult entertainment. and-
Right, no, that's what I'm looking at, so we are getting rid
Yeah,
of some less desirable
Yeah, yeah,
uses.
right, yeah.
Now, since you opened the concept, one of the things I talked about with Edie, and it's okay. I'm gonna ask the question of the committee anyway, is as we're going through this, while we're asking, ultimately, we hope we'll be able to get permission to ask for the addition of this overlay zone. At the same time, is there anything here as part of the base zone that we might want to tweak?
Like one thing that comes up right away is the question of charging stations, which we know zoning is independently working on creating the language for charging stations. And we would want to make sure that's a possibility on that road. So that's included in our list. Another thing is that's come up is drive-through pharmacies
Right.
for testing for COVID. That's another thing that we feel is really important for a health reason to allow for. And just like we have a site development permit need for banks, the same thing could be for pharmacies. We aren't really thinking it's worth changing it for restaurant and coffee shops, mainly because it's very hard to control, you know, McDonald's versus what's a Starbucks. I mean,
Yeah.
and we also still want to keep encouraging people to get out of their cars and walk around. But with COVID, the pharmacy idea seems to be very important.
So things like that, like Edie just said, you know, maybe we want to ask as part of the application, adding this overlay zone, ask the zoning commission to consider allowing drive-through pharmacies as part of the base zone too. I mean, things like, questions like that are coming up.
So that, I would suggest that would be something that the committee should agree to, so that this is final for the zoning commission. And a couple of other comments along that same vein.
Yep.
What continues to be allowed that may be for consideration is marine facility boat livery. So if you've got a whole bunch of shrink wrap boats, by lot, do you want that?
Right, right. One thing we wanted to allow was if you wanted to have kayak rental along the river, that seemed like something that should be a possibility.
Right.
But marine in here, which is probably a C30 thing from other locations.
Right, yeah, old sober.
You know, what do we want to throw in or throw out of that? And so that's why this is still a work in progress.
Right. For example, that's on the screen right here. Boat livery, sail loft, and marine research are allowed by special permit now,
Right.
but they're not defined in zoning. So it's hard what is meant by that. And we may want to, I would recommend, because we've added some additional definitions as part of the previous work. Maybe we want to define these, but I think that's a situation where we want to talk to the current zoning commission about what is their understanding of some of these things that aren't defined. Even pharmacy, when I went to add that today, pharmacy is not a definition. of their current zoning.
It's part of retail business. Really scroll down a little bit on there.
Sure.
So just keep in mind, this is, you know, in our little flow chart, this is us working through questions, and by making a comparison, it helps us to recognize things we need to work further on. You know, we also, the good news is Ray did speak with a lawyer, Bill Sweeney, who is down in Saybrook. He also does planning, and he has agreed to work with us. And he said, you know, usually these things can start at 5,000. If you put in 10,000, that should cover it. So that's not gotten that far. He probably couldn't start until January. But I think that could.
He's actually from New London. He's part of the Tobin firm,
It was a new limit.
New London. Yeah.
Sorry.
So we want to, as we keep thinking of other things to consider, we want to get as many of those ideas out there so that when we hand him the package in January, you know,
Bye, hun.
fleshed out. So any comments people have would be great, so we can give as much as we can to this person.
We did meet with a couple property owners, and they were very pleased with this.
And they gave us a couple of
Good
additional
idea.
comments
The
themselves.
drive-through thing came up, like the charging stations came up. And,
You just go over what's going on with the charging stations, everybody is aware of Dan working on that.
Yeah, so the charging stations is something that actually Paul was very, so he has the zoning commission working on that independently. We actually originally tried to get the language for that, and then we heard that the town was working on it already. So that's clearly an important thing. You know, Tesla's still asking to set up some stations here. They're very interested in doing something here. We want to make sure that on Halls Road, we don't have Tesla stations looking like gas stations where they're right up on the road. We'd rather see them set back behind buildings as opposed to right up front on top of the road. So that would be something.
That's why we put it here by special permit with a setback 60 feet.
So, but I think that what I understand from Dan, they are working on that, and it was last zoning meeting. Done. I don't know how much, other than the notes I saw in the meeting, I didn't see how much.
Is this?
Yeah, you can take that, just keep in mind, mark it up for Sundays and comments.
I gave you one.
Okay. And then this is also going with that same thing. This is the next page for pieces.
Dimensional requirements.
Right, and one of the things that came up was if you want to build something, if you're one of the larger parcels and you want to build something right up against the road for your overlay, but you don't want to lose your tenants because you want them to move into that building that's going to be up on the road. We need to figure out a way to make it possible to add some density to Paul's Road so that that's a possibility. And also, how does it get worded to make that possible?
Yeah, so in other
That's another
words,
thing we're working on.
people could either build along Halls Road under the overlay zone and not exceed. And if they wanted to keep what's there now in the back of their parcel, there's a certain density they can't exceed or percentage of lot coverage. Or they could build along Halls Road and maximize their lot coverage with the understanding that once that new building is constructed, they would demolish their old building. And we want to make that clear that they have that option.
Or
That they don't have to demolish their old current building before they start building.
But the idea is maybe demolishing it or not having it. Allowing more density is what we're trying to get to, so that they don't have, I mean, telling someone you have to tear down your building
No, right.
seems like a bad idea, so.
Right. So they,
Again, trying to get more, not take away.
Yeah, on 6A, is that measured from the parking lot elevation or from the Halls Road elevation? There's a difference.
yes. And your zoning language has a very detailed definition of how to measure that height. And it has nothing to do with the road or the parking. It has to do with the land adjacent to the building and the median elevation of a blah, 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 blah. So
So it's like a raised ground. or
It's-
slope.
it's very well defined in zoning. And I can't repeat it, but it's very well
But if
defined.
you're standing on the parking surface, would it be greater than 35 feet? Because of some area, do you think?
Yes, I think
It could be, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that Paul's Road, what we were assuming is Paul's Road is where the frontage can only be 2.5 feet, but if you go down the grade,
Right.
Could be 3
it
stories.
could be a little higher.
Or if you're at 4 and 6 Davis Road, it could be much higher from Falls Road, and that 45 feet could look like 2 feet because it's 7 feet up from
Right,
Falls Road
Right.
to the.
but right up
Right,
against the road, I think.
Right up
If
against the
you're,
road.
if you're in the shopping center approaching the building from the interstate, let's say, you'd have a retail there, then you'd have 2 levels of residential perhaps.
Perhaps, yes.
So that would exceed 35 feet, so the calculation has to,
Got to mesh with
something
Yeah.
that would give you a little more latitude, because, you know, it's probably 10 feet per story.
yes,
It's-
10 feet.
Yeah.
So actually the 35, and I'm sure you know this, is if the first floor is commercial, it may exceed 10 feet. So you may be up to 15 feet on the first floor, and then 2 10-foots above that, which gives you your 3 stories and 35.
Yeah.
So Tim,
standard
this is a good example. This is looking from the liquor store across the parking. This is actually much taller, but on the street on Halls Road,
Yeah.
this is the maximum height. That peak would be at the same as that.
That's 2 level, 3 level.
Right, but that because the grade goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're taking the slope and averaging.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I would say because of the way Halls Road is,
Yeah.
you're not going to see more than that 2.5 stories along Halls Road, because it drops off on the big Y side,
Yeah.
and on the other side it goes up, but it's very gradual.
So, yeah, so the question of adding to the density right now, it's, the maximum total lot coverage. 55, and we're suggesting it might be. So that you can allow, you know, if you look at the highway, say I buy the highway land, I tear down everything that's there, I rebuild something beautiful along the river, and I want to do my building along the Halls Road. You know, that's adding more coverage to the whole property, so we need to make sure that that's a possibility, as opposed to saying you can't.
And it's gonna be reliant upon parking requirements.
Right.
Different
Parking and
uses,
septic, and,
right, all
yeah,
that.
there's a lot of details that
So
will deter that.
75%, if you can make it work.
If you can make it work, exactly. Yeah.
Plus, we are, speaking of parking, we are now allowing parking beneath the building. So that if you tuck your parking in,
Right.
then that's within that building envelope, which allows you to be closer to that 75%.
That's a great addition. One thing on the minimum setback.
Yep.
From the street line, right? One issue, what is the street line? That needs to be a defined term.
So it's very clear on the right of way.
And so,
It's actually right,
Getting back
it's
to your
quite wide.
comment about the survey, it's the property line between the state roadway property and private property. It's from that property.
from which property?
Where the roadway ends and the private property begins, that property.
That's.
I see. So, but if there are areas, I just don't know. Because we don't have the detail yet. But if there's a sidewalk that actually does go onto private property and needs a slight easement of some sort, that reduces that 15 feet potentially. And
The sidewalk would have to be on the right of way. It couldn't be on private property. Unless you want to have your own private sidewalk.
well, no, I mean, you can get easements. For sidewalks if you thought it should go
If
somewhere.
it's your property, you want to build your own sidewalk, that's fine, but the main new sidewalk that would come in from the public improvements could all be on the right of way.
That's what this kind of is.
Yeah, that's the solution.
Yep, and we do have enough room, we've kind of verified already, we have enough real estate, so that sidewalk can reside on.
40 feet from the center line?
It varies.
Oh, it absolutely varies, there's no
It's
fixed
very
number.
wide in here.
But that's my
And
point,
then
of
it's
like,
narrow.
needing to know,
Yeah.
you say that it's all within that.
Yep.
So
We have-
preliminarily,
We have verified that.
you verified that.
Oh, yeah.
And things like, street parking, if there's not enough room to have a sidewalk and street parking, you wouldn't have street parking.
Right.
You'd have it only in certain sections where it's wide.
But that's contemplated already with our kind of wish list.
Yes.
But the 15 feet, so if you've got 15 feet from the end of the right of way, for DOT, that is the street line. Right? So, and is that defined in our zoning regs or no?
It's 60 feet.
No, the property line's a property line. So it's,
Well, what is a street line? I thought you said that was where the DOT's right of way ended.
Yeah, it's essentially the same thing.
Right, so that should be clear.
It's not the edge of the pavement. It's,
Right.
it's the property line.
Because I know people have asked me that.
Yeah.
I didn't know because it's not defined in at least what we were looking at here. No, I didn't look at the main regs.
So,
But that 15 feet in back, let's say we used it all up, right, because we got on-street parking. Then that 15 feet starts where on-street parking ends at the curb. And then you need you'd have a sidewalk of some sort, right? And depending, these days, everyone wants 5 feet, but.
yeah, 5 feet minimum.
So there's 5 feet, and then you have 10 more feet before you get to the property, which precludes a nice coffee shop with something outside like we've got, because that's from 15 feet or 12 feet or something like that. So that's a consideration.
If I can answer, Edie, that the 15 feet from the property line. So let's say this is private and this is the roadway over here. And as we laid out in our master plan, from that property line toward the street, there's enough room there to have a sidewalk, parking in some places, and obviously your roadway. If it gets too narrow, the on-street parking will go away. In no place do we think the sidewalk or the parking needs to infringe on that 15 feet.
Got it. So an owner of a property has 15 feet from his or her property line.
No, I wouldn't call it the road. They can go right up against the property.
Correct.
So they can build up to it.
Yeah, so that was 10 feet, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
We actually measured the setback from the edge of the sidewalk in front of the ice cream shop to the building. That's 15 feet.
Excellent.
Give you something.
Thank you.
What helped us here, Dave, is that through this area, the DOT actually has a pretty wide swath of land. And that made it kind of easy, that it's so big, everything fits.
Right, if everything is.
Yep.
within DOT,
It was very clean.
that's a heck of a-
Yeah, everything fits right in there, quite nicely.
Now, the 15 feet would be where the private property owner started building.
Oh, no, Jeff,
If their property line, the roadway's here, their property line is here, they can build up to their property line, but no further back than 15 feet from that property
Up to the
line.
property line.
Because there would be a sidewalk already.
Correct.
Well,
The sidewalk
how
would be over here.
does the property owner provide parking, for, if you want to have his own parking, not dependent on the,
It would be behind.
behind the building.
Right.
Or under,
The zoning's been, makes it clear that the parking, wherever you place your building, needs to be beside or behind the building.
okay,
We don't want parking in that 15 feet.
okay.
And is there the same concept of a requirement of what the facade should be that actually fronts Paul's room?
We,
Minimums? I guess because the concept was minimums.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So that again was so that we didn't allow for, oh, I got commercial property up against the street, so I'll put a kiosk
Skinny
there.
piece. Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
that's not really what we're trying to get to. So it does need to be a certain percentage. And, some property owners are very long and others aren't, so there's another thing we need to kind of fine tune. But it would require a certain length of building or building, so like on the marketplace side, the south side of Falls Road, you could easily put 3 buildings between there and the stoplight and still have enough coverage that shows that it's.
Yep. Great.
so any comments would be great, because we want to pull this, package together to give the attorney and get their input in January.
So the existing buildings are set back quite a lot because they have street parking in front of them
Correct.
on their own property. So if the sidewalk and the street parking, could they keep their parking in front of their store?
If they don't want to use the overlay, they can keep it exactly the way it is.
Correct.
If they don't want to do residential, they can keep it exactly the way it is.
But if they wanted to follow the new overlay for some reason, then they have to comply with
Yes.
this. Their building would be,
So basically, the building, the street buildings is sort of, the residential is the carrot to get people to want to do some development on the road. But it's requiring that we get buildings built up along the road so that we can see the new change that we.
So like Citizens Bank, if they want to do something to the building, they'd have to come closer to the road.
They want to add residential, yes.
But they would have to comply with the entire right-hand column. It's
Yeah.
not a Chinese menu.
Right,
or-
right.
Hey, this one works for.
Right.
This
But I mean, if they've got a building that they don't intend to make any changes, wanted to renovate that building as it was, keeping it as an overlay allows them to maintain a C30 status, but not go into overlay unless they want to put in residential.
Or increase the height or.
And so what, on number 8, it says minimum setback from rear property line. Is that the rear line of the property?
Yes.
So
So-
if the property is a couple hundred feet deep,
They can't, it allows, so, right, let's say the big Y property. So it abuts the highway. So there could be no building closer than 15, any building built along the back of the property needs to be at least 15 feet away from that rear property line.
okay.
The 15 feet is to allow public safety access. So if a fire truck or another safety vehicle needs to get around the building, that 15 feet gives enough room for a safety vehicle to get back there to do something. So if you're like right up against the property line and,
So the sideline would be 7.5 feet.
right,
That's
which
between
means that
other
the
properties.
properties abutting each other, they each have 7.5, but then gets the 15 feet on the sidelines too. And we would like to talk to public safety about that, to see if they're comfortable. That's one of our boxes we need to check on.
Judy, did you want to?
I did have a question, I arrived late. So a property owner who doesn't want a sidewalk or parking in front of their building now, if they don't have one now, they do not have to have one if the changes are made?
So it's two separate things. The
Yeah.
right of way with the public improvements will be putting in sidewalks all the way down Falls
both
Road
sides?
On state property.
on state property.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it will change the configuration of some of these places, maybe for their.
it probably will, yes.
Yeah, well, for treasures, for example, that's the
Yeah.
obvious one,
Yeah.
right? But that doesn't mean you can't have, a sidewalk that is. A sidewalk that is identified,
Correct.
but can be driven over.
We've done that before, yes.
Oh, okay, so it wouldn't be a raised sidewalk if they've got a flat access to their parking.
This I
area.
don't know.
We can't say whether it be one or the other right now. That would be part of this next design phase, because
And
on that, they
also,
say,
Yeah, DOT may.
we don't want 100-foot wide, big open driveway here.
Right.
And I'm not
I
saying
mean,
what
it
they
is
would
kind of
say.
dangerous to have that long a spread for pedestrians to walk along.
No,
and
I
people
get
get
that,
backing in
but-
and out of that area usually.
But then the question
That's
is
a
walking.
resistant sidewalk for people that don't want to access to their business.
Correct.
So, and if the sidewalk there and its raised, it will impact some businesses and their access to their work.
Defer to-
Yeah, as
I don't
part of
think we don't have a definitive answer one way or the other. It would be
Yep.
part of the next design phase.
As part of the design process, we would look at each business on a case-by-case basis to make sure we're maintaining appropriate access. So in other words, we would never have a situation where we put a sidewalk through there and just cut someone off.
Yeah.
In fact, DOT
I'm
wouldn't even
happy to
allow
hear
it.
that, because I think that's a big misunderstanding. And some places are going to welcome the sidewalk.
Yes.
So in Sound View, we had to close off a
Yeah,
wide expanse and make it a proper access and,
and some people are still complaining.
Yeah, but it is a case by case basis. We like to talk to the business owners and make sure, it's just like we've done with zoning, we want to make it a win-win for everybody. Good idea.
So the next thing to helping us get this language figured out, I mean, we have talked with 2 property owners and we've gotten stuff from Dave, the property owners. But we'd like to try and have a workshop in early January for business owners and even the public, to to come in and see designs and talk with us one-on-one, similar to our open houses, so that we can get some more consensus on questions, important ideas, things that we need to make sure of. I mean, I think the going to the overlay zone helps us tremendously to get away from this whole non-conformity issue, which was clearly a big problem. You know?
Would you consider having a session for the property owners first and then the public second?
We could do it that way too. Yeah, yeah.
Because the big-
I mean, we'd like to maybe send out a notice to all the property owners asking if they could set up some appointments with us. The two that we already spoke with, you know, they don't really want to talk in public about their ideas. Some people have different things that they don't really want to do it as a group. That's why we met with two people already.
Sure.
And clearly we're listening to everything we hear and trying to make sure we're giving it our attention. So I think maybe we could send out a letter to the property owners and then have an open house.
Yeah.
For the whole town or whatever, you know, I mean, I don't see it as a town meeting as much as an open house type format where you can talk directly to people.
About 2 stages, I think.
Yeah, like the ones we've done.
I think that would probably prompt more frank, business owners, separate from folks who don't have a dog in the fight. In terms of
Yeah.
their-
Absolutely. And
So I think that's something we want to try and schedule up, and probably the zoning committee could just put together a plan and come up with some dates to do that and let you know what we're trying to get to.
And zoning, bless this.
We have our little zoning subcommittee.
No, the zoning
Right.
subcommittee were
This-
for this.
He's asking about the zoning committee.
Oh,
I mean, does Dan, he likes the columns.
I gave it to him last week. I went in yesterday and asked him if he had looked at it enough to give me any comments.
Yeah.
He said, no, I haven't.
Okay.
So,
I have one procedural question that's not addressed by these,
Okay.
and that's this layering on of the design committee, right? And there are 2 things with that. One is the length of time that it creates an additional at least 65 days and probably more depending, right?
it's
Because
supposed to be within the same 65 days of the, that's right.
it didn't look like it was
It's
parallel.
within the 65-day
We'll double
timeline,
check.
put in your application.
We had heard, because we had heard that comment previously. that we
Yeah,
didn't want to
it's
extend the
sequential. Of the 3 months.
Right.
And that's not a concept,
It's
that's
at the
great.
same time. It should be-
The second thing is the composition requirement. Right now, I think there's a requirement that 2 members of the committee are AIA architect, right?
Yeah.
And landscape architect, right?
Or a plan.
For a plan.
Or a planner. What if we can't find those guys? And do you want, and maybe there's another way to do that, and that is a review by a planner or a landscape architect or an AIA architect, something like that. If we have a requirement and we have a vacancy on the design committee and we can't find somebody for 3 months, nobody's gonna be able to get anything passed. And, you know.
So you're
some of the zoning
suggesting
regs
maybe
are
we
gonna
could
pass.
pay someone to review it?
Or it can be part of an application. Like-
And some towns do that. We've actually served as a reviewer and the applicant pays the fee.
So, we have in there now that the zoning commission can hire a reviewer, but you bring up a very good point, because I'm a landscape architect, and I was asked to serve on a design review committee in the town I lived in because there were no architects.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so if we're
Very
left
good
with a
point.
vacancy, it's just gonna delay the process, so.
it's a
it's
very
spirit
good
of-
point.
And the applicant should pay up to $1,000 or whatever it is, as part of the process. And that would relieve a situation where you didn't have. the
Well, I think
person.
it'd be easier to hire someone than it would be to get a volunteer.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
difficult to get that.
Yeah, especially 2 very specific
Right.
volunteers, not just one.
And sometimes the fees are based on the proposed square footage of the building. That way, it's sort of a uniform. As applications come in, everybody pays the same rate, if you will,
Yeah.
So you can tie it to the size or scale of the development, so it's fair.
So the applicant is paying for the review.
Yes, in all the cases we've done it, the applicant pays for the
And
review.
is the reviewer town appointed?
Yeah, in all the cases, we've been sort of like on call to the town for, you know, a 3-year period, you're a reviewer, anything that comes in, you know, here's the process, here's the time frame, and here's the standards, and we review it for them.
And the other thing that struck me in the original zoning regs were what triggered the need for design and review and approvals and that sort of thing. And originally, it had been, and it was a little bit vague in terms of the language. But if you had some sort of renovation that you wanted to do, right, existing, that triggered the whole process.
Yes.
So thinking about, and I haven't revisited that language but thinking about a way to make sure that it's a material change that triggers anything that's gonna make somebody's life more complicated than, hey, I'm putting in a bathroom or renovating a bathroom.
So that did come up, and this will be, I think, where the attorney will be able to help, because we did define that. We said major alteration. We had new construction or major alteration triggered design review, and we defined major alteration. And then minor alteration was just administrative review.
Right.
So we did define that, and we'll be.
Was demolition removed? Demolition was another trigger. Just,
Yeah, I don't recall, you could be right.
yeah, but the attorney, with that spirit.
Yes.
If it was all inside the building as a major renovation, that wouldn't bother the
No, I
exterior.
think it's really exterior facade changes that we're
Yes.
looking at, not, you know, like the Big Y just did like a $2 million renovation. The only thing they changed on the exterior was that entryway.
Yeah, bottle recycling.
So, yeah, that's not considered.
Get rid of all the food.
Alteration to the building.
$1 million on that, out of the 2 million.
New sliding doors.
So what will be, I think we should map out, what is the zoning process going forward? You know, we have this, the next step is to have the open houses, and then, okay, we have those. What are the next, where do we go from there to a complete zoning process? What steps do we need?
So the goal is to try and get stuff done, possibly to apply in February, if we can do it that quickly, I don't know that we can.
So
But-
February, I'm sorry, excuse me, February for the open houses?
No,
Oh.
January for the open house.
Okay.
And the business conversations.
All those, yeah. The
And
input
then,
piece.
and then we need to get new language set up for the overlay district.
Yep.
That Jeff is currently working on, and that's what this stuff is about, but also the actual
Right.
document. Then we need to work at the same time with, not at the same time, but with a new legal person, with
Right.
Jen Sweeney. So we
You
need
need
him to
language
review what
and
Jeff is working on.
attorney review, and that's February?
Yeah.
Okay. Then what?
And then we, send in the application.
And then,
Well,
okay, who do we
it's gonna-
need?
It's gonna go through the board again.
Yeah, we need, what board, and where do we need approval
The board is
by
selecting.
this committee,
Yeah, first this committee.
even if they're board of selectmen?
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay, so we need Falls Road, we need the board of selectmen, anyone else? Okay, okay. All right, so we're talking maybe March. So if
Yeah,
we
I think
do
it's
January
March.
input, February,
Yeah.
language,
March
legal,
application.
and then kind of March, finalize and get approval. So those are kind of the three
To
steps.
send in the application
Right.
in March and then probably
Approval.
get 65 days.
Right. Okay.
When do you need the money approval for some of this?
So that gets us to the next piece, which is the budget. But we are skipping, so we've kind of talked about grants, and since Matt was sick as well, so he must be scooping it off. where that is, but
The only question that I had for grants is, as described, what is the expected timing to have stuff together to go? Because what the sequence that you had described was, let's get some river cog sign off, and while we're working on the plans, some of this stuff can happen parallel. What do you think the rough timing could be?
I think we had something in the proposal, and I can't recall, but I think we had said something like 6 weeks. We could have the design package done. And then I think we had said we would then wait to see what the committee wanted to do as far as the lot zip application itself, but that doesn't take a long time. During that 6-week design period, we would meet with the River Cog, that's when we would meet with DOT. And then I think we have a few interactions with the committee during that period to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the design. Once the design is done, the lot zip application itself wouldn't really take that long. You know, it's filling out paperwork, project goals, narratives, and those things. But really the bulk of those applications tends to be your design plans, but at that point, you'd already have the master plan, the report, the design plans, and that would all be part of the application.
Yeah.
So we could probably, design phase 6 weeks, we could turn the lot zip application around probably in another 3 to 4 weeks after that. And by the way, there are things that could be parallel. The way that we structured our approach was we wouldn't do anything to the lot zip application until the committee was comfortable with the plans. But if the committee said, hey, we're halfway through them, we think these are great, this is wonderful, go ahead and get started on the application in parallel to working on the plans, we could shave 3 weeks off the process very easily.
and then also, can you talk a little bit about the fact that there's other parts to the public improvements that's more of a trailway as opposed to the DOT right of way. So the path going, the path going from Line Street to the bridge and the bridge.
Yeah.
Those are all things that would get a grant from trail type of grants as
So
opposed to
that's
lot
separate.
zip. So that's another
Right.
thing, and also
Yeah.
another reason we're looking for work from BSC to help us with the easement information for Gragel's
Yeah, right,
property.
yeah.
I'd really like to get that done because, he's being extremely generous, allowing us to cross over his property, and I'd like to get that sewed up before much else changes.
Yeah.
Who has to approve the bridge? Go through that a little. How does that? Where is that? how does
Yeah,
that
so
approve?
it all, in sort of the life cycle, it all starts with the funding. So as Edie mentioned, maybe it's like a deep recreational trails grant or something. Once you're funded, you go through your design process. And again, that's funded by the town, very typical of these processes. So as part of that design process, there's various investigations that take place. Geotechnical investigations, probably some sort of environmental investigations, wetland delineation, potentially other things depending on if there's state listed species or those things that every once in a while you'd be surprised if you show up on certain mapping, all of a sudden you've got to do a survey. For example, I had to do a survey for dragonflies on a project and freshwater mussels because they showed up on a map and I was inside the shaded area on the map. There you go. Once all that stuff is done, yes, you're absolutely correct, Dave. Army Corps, because there's certain requirements, because it is a navigable waterway. Pretty well defined type stuff. The regulations for the people that work with them are pretty clear, and the steps are pretty well defined. But so you work through that permitting process as part of the design process, and typically what you'll do is like a 90% design, and that's what you use for your permitting. And then once that gets finalized, you just bring it to 100%. So it's, a set of biddable drawings and those kinds of things. And the environmental permitting is always the step that is the most unknown with regards to time frame. Depending on the workload, even things we've experienced this with deep staffing levels, you submit your permit and then you wait. And that can be frustrating because people say, well, how long is it gonna take? And unfortunately, we just don't know. We just don't know. That's where a very good, solid, detailed application package helps make it easy for those people to review it. And as long as you've essentially checked all the boxes and done things that in general comply with all the regulations, that bodes well. It's when you have things that don't quite meet the regulations.
Can you bring me my thing, please?
That you have issues. In this case, it's actually fairly straightforward because we're not gonna be water, we're not gonna be, so, I don't think a bridge across the Lieutenant River would be viewed as an unusual or overly complex type permitting process.
Since we had one 150 years ago.
And also,
That's a child labor.
Yeah.
on Friday, there was a deadline to submit an intent to apply for a particular trail grant that we did manage to get in, which was amazing. And, but that means it needs to be applied by January 14th, I think. So that's another reason we need this happening. We can't really ask for grants. Really.
That's the trail.
There's several trail grants. I was speaking generically, trail grants. I can go look it up, but there's.
And who's doing those?
No, this would be something that Matt is working on, and we are looking for other people to help him out.
Is he,
Pretty busy.
where is he, you know?
He's sick today.
Oh,
He was
where is he?
coming. I
Okay.
spoke with him on
Okay.
Friday at length, and
So we'll get that at the next meeting.
yeah. So.
Yeah, I've got to go in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
with my daughter. So I can do signage, and I took a look at the proposed numbers for.
Dave asked all my stuff.
Two things.
Dave asked all my stuff.
Hey, Deb, can you mute, Deb? So the two things are this year, right?
Yeah.
And that's extraneous to the budget. So
Yes.
that needs to go to the Board of Selectmen and then the Board of Finance.
I'm sorry, what needs to be?
Any,
Financial.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's for
for this fiscal year, that hasn't been budgeted, which is,
Like 37.
yeah, 37.5.
Oh, yeah,
So that will ultimately need to go to a town meeting.
Right.
okay.
We can cobble together some money probably from somewhere potentially, but, so that's the process there. But then the question is, the budget year, July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 23, have you submitted?
I have
anything?
not. I mean, I've only put this together, and we'd like to work on this with you and help me figure out how to.
There's really not that much for that next year. There are two big categories, I think.
Yeah.
Happy to do that. Think
Okay.
about that, because that's gotta go in, we're gonna start the budget process, in
Yeah,
January. So I'll take a look at that tomorrow.
Okay.
Would
Yeah,
there, I
that-
guess
that
it
would
would
be
be if
great.
there's any design work required,
That's right.
because that's the big stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about in the easement process?
For the easement process,
that-
the only thing I don't think that Kurt included was the actual legal fees in this design.
Do you need budget for that?
10,000.
Well, the 10,000 is for the zoning.
I thought it was 5,000 pedestrian bridge and trail. That's.
No, let me speak to that, please.
Sure.
The 5,000 is just a reasonable estimate for a simple, straightforward zoning application by an individual. So that's the number of hours that, and we probably will do a little better. So that is not what we have. So the 5,000 was just what we were talking about for a minimum retainer. Probably. I mean, he didn't commit because he hadn't seen anything really.
Right.
So, but I was straightforward with him that there was a possibility that we would have some opposition during the 65-day period, and we'd probably have some back and forth with some property owners or some whoever. So it's not simple. So we came up with the 10,000, figuring that probably gives us enough slack that that we'd be able to manage it, within 30 hours or thereabouts of time. And, it may not be that much if things go really smoothly. So it's not 5,000, it's 10,000, but the retainer presumably will be about 5,000. And then we'll just pay the hours as they come up after the retainer is exhausted. So that's the rough scheme.
Yeah, Ray, so there are two things. One is any legal to get us through any potential zoning changes. That's one thing.
That's zoning.
Is that what you're addressing here?
That's all I was addressing. Yes, that's all.
So the second thing is for the easement
For the
itself.
bridge, is that gonna be additional?
So Kurt, on your proposal for the easement, it did not include use for that easement?
Correct. We just assumed that the town would use its.
So can we do that
Either
within the town's?
I'd rather put it in the budget because, these
Yeah.
operating budgets have modest amounts and we got into a jam with the sound view stuff. Oh, well, the town can take care of it. No. So I think the budget should
So then there's
incorporate.
some-
And you're probably not using the town attorney, right? You're gonna use zoning.
Well,
Yeah.
It could be any number of, but the number should be part of the project.
Yeah.
I think that's an error here. We need to add in something for
Right.
legal fees for the easement.
For the Gradle.
Yes, that's-
Yeah.
yeah, I thought that.
For the
Would you
Connecticut
have an
Trail.
idea what that might run, right?
I really don't. I think it's more of a that there you have to have your surveys and things like that. So the attorney side of it, I think, is relatively straightforward when you have an agreeable person like Graybill. So it would probably just be a few hours. You'd have $1,500 or something like that.
$100 or
Why don't we'll put 2,000.
Yeah.
That's probably sufficient. Yeah, it's because it's pretty standard
It's
stuff.
easy, yeah.
Is there any legal fees with the bridge? then? You anticipate?
Probably not. It's all, once you have your easement in place, it's probably technical in nature.
So they have to test that abutment stuff.
Oh, they definitely would, yeah. That'd be part of the
But
design
that's
process.
kind of a,
That's
that's
later.
not an easement related.
No, yeah, that's a.
Can we put a toll booth in?
Yeah, you'll have a geotechnical assessment, a structural assessment of the abutments and.
Yeah,
Okay, so I'll update that to put in the. legal.
maybe 7,000.
Yeah, maybe I'll give you a call. And we can just finalize it because it
Yeah, that would be
Yeah, we
good.
should probably put a nice contingency in there on top of everything else, just for.
So let me give Simon just quickly.
The only other thing I can possibly think of for a budget is if we need outside help, like these other trail grants, but I mean, when you look at the applications, it's just filling in the blanks, it's not like
You have to be
a
creative.
lot
You
of
don't
pros
have to
or
be-
anything.
Yeah.
It's not- it's-
Good creative pros.
Could someone in your office do that?
To do what?
In the town office?
Do simple grant applications?
Depending how complex it is.
Yeah, no, she's saying it would be pretty simple, right?
It is
Filling out
simple.
a form, kind of.
I'm just
Yeah, we could
concerned because Matt is, he wants to do it, but he's.
Yeah, we can't do it.
Right.
Yeah, I want to do it in about 6 weeks.
If it's simple, it sounds like maybe someone.
Let's take a look at the
It's
application.
mainly having, Matt was supposed to be the person that was like, the camp leader, got all the
Right.
pieces together and figured out who to use to do what.
Yeah,
So
not necessarily.
he's not seeming to have that time to do it.
So we need someone to kind of take over grant responsibility, at least putting it together.
All right, so
We could perhaps help out on that specific thing, but getting more involved, night meetings and all that.
No, not the other, it's just
I tried.
Yeah,
putting either the trail grants is just basically
yeah. it's
filling
a-
out a form.
Right, putting in the verbiage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Michelle, Nora.
Okay. And then you can look at it, and if she says, oh, this is more complicated, then we gotta revisit that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But maybe on the flip side, if we went up to
I
75,
gotta go. Can I just, just quickly on signage.
Oh, good.
Yeah, just very quickly. So I have two tags here. I had Edidante, last meeting I talked about Edidante, head of Public Works. You got in touch with DOT and Waterford covers this area. So, and they now have the report here in the field, and I had, they have not gone out with that yet. They had promised to do that the week prior to Thanksgiving. They didn't do it. I called it today. They haven't scheduled something yet. It's okay. So then I went through Devin Carney, and Devin received this from the DOT. This is in response. This is classic. This is in response to State Representative Carney's inquiry regarding sign clutter and other miscellaneous concerns at several locations in the vicinity of Paul's Road. Traffic engineer, now this is good and then it's a little slippery. Traffic engineering plans to do the following. That's capital T, capital E. Review existing signing from the submitted report. That was the photographs that I had suggested in further detail. Sub-bullet, existing signs may be removed, relocated, and or replaced where appropriate to follow federal guidance. Okay. Second bullet, review request and removal of the newspaper boxes within the commuter line, none of which have been used in probably 15 years. Anyway, it says, but it is unlikely they will be removed as they do not impact sight lines or traffic behavior. And we're most likely installed encroachment.
We have a solution for that.
The midnight, box. Number 3 is request the District 2 Maintenance Office to contact the appropriate phone company to remove their existing equipment also in the commuter lot. So we got, I guess, 1 out of 3 things. Now, this is the high level. So I figured with Ed, go, I told him I'd buy lunch or whatever. Maybe we can get some progress on that. So that was a little bit of progress.
Good work.
Cool. All right, I do everything else.
All right.
And thank you so much for being responsive to the comments in the past. I think that we're in a much better place still, some refinements, that's for sure. And I think the business owners will appreciate the work that's going into it. We'll have constructive conversation.
We know the property owners we've talked to.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll just let down anyway, so.
I'll call you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I get you?
I'll stay if you need me to, but if you don't. Yeah. Okay.
I don't want to be rude.
No,
Great, yeah, very helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Did I hear a motion to adjourn or did I miss it?
I think we can do that.
I guess so.
We got everything, right?
Did you second that?
Okay.
There you go, second it. All in favor? Yes.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all.
On the 37.5, we might just increase the pedestrian bridge to 7,500 or something. And then you can make that a 40.
Okay.
And then I guess we could think if there could be any contingency type of thing for stuff that we can't consider at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking we might need some kind of money for some mailings and printing and that
Right.
kind of stuff. I had
Right.
a bottom of my list, I think $2,000, but that was.
Yeah, if you want to get wild and crazy, you can look at a 50 and just have.
I mean, I hate to make it that high, but.
45, something like
45.
that.
A great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye, Kurt, thank you
Thanks.
so
Yeah.
much. for
I'll see
this.
you next week. And this would be for fiscal 21.
Yes.
June 30th. And I suppose in terms of some of these other bigger things, I guess if things started rolling, then I guess there needed to be money spent on moving to the next phase. That'll be another.
I mean, I'm sort of wondering if there's a chance to get these trail grants going. We might be able to get something going on from Line Street towards Halls Road. Now,
Yeah.
I don't, it's still probably gonna be a year round, but that might be 23, beginning of 23, so that would be next year's fiscal.
Yeah, which will be starting here.
Do you have that?
We've got 3 applications so far.
Could you give them, and then let Michelle look at it and see if you could do them, if not, then we'll look at it